This is part one of a two-part series on the formation of Northern Ireland. I am Andrew Charles. It's led on by the Siege Museum, Londonderry, and funded by Derry City and Strabane District Council. Northern Ireland came into existence with the passing of the Government of Ireland Act 1920. While it made a rather smooth passage through Parliament, it was a culmination of a series of events and political acts dating from 1885. In short, unionism was a reaction to growing Irish nationalism in Ireland. Unionism culminated in the first Home Rule Bill, which was introduced into the House of Commons in 1886 by the then Liberal government, who were supported by the Irish Parliamentary Party led by Charles Stewart Parnell. From this point on, unionism became a large movement of people, largely drawn from the province of Ulster, opposed to Home Rule in Dublin and it being foisted upon Ireland by London. Unionists believed that Home Rule would have little or no benefit to them, and that the Union established in 1801 had benefited Ireland, namely in Ulster, economically, socially and religiously. Unionist opposition to Home Rule can be summarised in 3 points. Social, believing that there were traditional and sentimental ties to Great Britain, Unionists regarding themselves as being British. Economic, there was a belief that Home Rule would usher in the end to what had become the economic powerhouse in Ulster. Religious, Ulster being largely Protestant, believed that Home Rule from Dublin would result in Rome Rule. So there was an issue of civil and religious liberties for all that were established during the Glorious Revolution, 1689 to 1691. Unionist opposition to Home Rule can be seen in the Ulster Solemn League and Covenant, which was signed on Ulster Day on the 28th of September 1912, across Ulster and indeed the world. It highlighted the cherished position within Ireland was within the United Kingdom, and a promise to use all means necessary to resist Home Rule in Ireland. To summarise the events in the lead up to the Ulster crisis, you had the first Home Rule Bill that was introduced into Parliament in 1886. This failed to pass the House of Commons, with Unionists having a majority. In 1892, on the basis that there was going to be a second Home Rule Bill introduced the following year, which there was in 1893, there was a large Unionist convention held in Botanic, South Belfast, where people resolved to oppose Home Rule. Unionism formed in Ulster through the Ulster Unionist Council, which was established in 1905, formalising what was and had been a collection of Unionist clubs. In 1911, the Parliament Act was passed. This played a significant factor in the Ulster crisis 1912-14, as it curtailed the power of the House of Lords, making that the House of Lords could only delay legislation as opposed to throw it out, which it had indeed done so in the second Home Rule Bill in 1893. So any third Home Rule Bill that would be introduced was likely to pass but be delayed for a period of 2 years. In September 1911, there was a large rally at Craigavon House in East Belfast, where Sir Edward Carson was introduced to Ulster Loyalists, approximately 100,000 people present, and at Craigavon House was presented as the new leader of Unionism. In April 1912, the Third Home Rule Bill was introduced into the House of Commons. There were a number of events in 1912 that included the Ulster Somme League and Covenant, but the roots of the Ulster Somme League and Covenant are seen in the Balmoral Review, which was a rally attended by Bonar Law, Sir Edward Carson and Sir James Craig, amongst many other dignitaries, in the Royal Agricultural Showgrounds in South Belfast. At that event, Carson raised his hand and told the audience to raise their hands and declare, "We shall not have Home Rule." In January 1913, the formation of the Ulster Volunteers was approved by the Ulster Unionist Council, and in April 1914 was the Larne gun running, when guns were secured from Germany and distributed across Ulster in the event of Home Rule being forced upon the people in Ulster. In July 1914, you had the Buckingham Palace Conference, which was led on by the King to try and come to some sort of resolution over Home Rule. So the Ulster crisis can be summarised in these events mainly with the introduction of the Third Home Rule Bill in April 1912 into the House of Commons. You had the Balmoral Review, you had the Ulster Somme League and Covenant on Ulster Day, 28th September 1912, formation of the Ulster Volunteer Force, who were preparing for provisional government on the introduction of Home Rule in Ireland, which was due to be introduced in April 1914. Yeah, the end of the Buckingham Palace Conference, and then the outbreak of war on the 3rd of August 1914, when Britain declared war on Germany. World War I put a halt to Home Rule in Ireland. The Home Rule Bill was passed, but followed by a suspensionary act, and Carson and Craig had the guarantee from Asquith that Home Rule would not be forced upon the provinces of Ulster. And Ulster was very keen to support Britain in the efforts in the First World War, so much so, on the outbreak of war, Carson offered Lord Kitchener, who was the Minister for War, the use of the Ulster Volunteer Force, which was a force made up of approximately 200,000 men. Members of the UVF were encouraged to join the ranks of what became the 36th Ulster Division on the outbreak of war, and that was established in September 1914. The date in the calendar for Ulster and for the 36th Ulster Division, and their first action was on the 1st of July 1916 beside on the River Somme at the Battle of the Somme. The 36th Ulster Division were the only division on the 1st of July to meet their objectives. The day itself, 1st of July, was historic because it was the date of the Battle of the Boyne under the old Julian calendar, and many men from the 36th Ulster Division wore orange ribbons, or, as reported, some collarettes and sashes as they went over the top to storm the German front lines. The result of their actions at the Somme and in Messina in 1917 made a case for Northern Ireland comprised of 6 counties which Unionists were arguing for. Just prior to the Battle of the Somme was the Easter Rebellion in April 1916, which happened on Easter Monday, the 24th of April, when rebels made up of Irish volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army took over locations within Dublin, including the General Post Office on Sackville Street. The Irish Proclamation was read at the steps of the GPO, declaring the establishment of a republic. The rebellion was initially frowned upon by Irish citizens who looked down on the men and women who were participating in this act of rebellion during a war. However, the rebels saw the war as England's problem being Ireland's opportunity. By the 12th of May, 15 leaders of the rebellion were executed by firing squad. Over 3,000 people suspected of supporting the uprising directly or indirectly were arrested, and some 1,800 were sent to England and imprisoned. The rushed executions, mass arrests and martial law, which remained in fact through the autumn of 1916, fueled public resentment toward the British and were among the factors that helped build support for the rebels and the movement for Irish independence, which was seen in the political organisation of Sinn Féin. Just to summarise where we're at, we had the outbreak of war in August 1914, we had the Easter Rebellion in 1916, the Battle of the Somme in July 1916, and as a result of changing Irish views in respect of the rebellion, we had Sinn Féin began to win a series of by-elections, including Eamon de Valera, who had declared himself President of the Republic, winning the seat of East Clare. In July 1917 to March 1918, there was an Irish convention to look at things regarding Home Rule. We then had the armistice, which was called on the 11th of November 1918, and followed by a general election that had been suspended due to the war, where Sinn Féin won a majority of seats in the general election. And on the 21st of January 1919, the first Dáil or Assembly sits. This is whereby Sinn Féin MPs stood on an abstentionist ticket and were going to sit in their own provisional government and establish their own provisional government with its an assembly. De Valera was one of the leaders of the Easter Rebellion, and he was elected by MPs as president of Sinn Féin in October 1917. He was previously elected Sinn Féin MP in the East Clare by-election, as discussed, which was created by the vacancy of the death of Willie Redmond, brother of John, leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party, on the 7th of June 1917 at the Battle of Messines, where he fought along members of the 36th Ulster Division and was in fact one of the stretcher bearers who took him to the casualty clearing station was an Ulsterman, a member of the 36th Ulster Division. The changes to these by-elections and Sinn Féin winning the by-elections was the first signal of change, with Sinn Féin winning subsequent by-elections until the general election of December 1918, when they won the majority of Irish seats in the House of Commons. All Sinn Féin MPs refused to take their seats and formed a provisional government and assembly in Dublin. The Irish Convention. The Irish Convention sat from July 1917 to March 1918. It was set up in response to the rise of Sinn Féin and was down to changing political dynamics, which it was decided upon to include civic leaders as well as parliamentarians, but not Sinn Féin. It was chaired by a unionist called Sir Horace Plunkett, and at the convention, the item was floated, albeit on a temporary basis. This was opposed by John Redmond and the Nationalists, as well as Southern Unionists. The Irish Convention was a failure, with no agreement being reached. However, it was used as an opportunity for the government to try and direct policy in relation to Ireland after the First World War. On the 11th of November 1918, an armistice came into place at the 11th hour. It marked a cessation of the war, but was not viewed as a surrender. Churchill is regularly quoted as saying, the whole map of Europe has been changed, but as the deluge subsides and the waters fall short, we see the dreary steeples of Fermanagh and Tyrone emerging once again. This was a reminder that Home Rule and the situation in Ireland had not been forgotten, and despite the destruction and devastation of much of Europe after a long fought, bloody, gruesome war, the issue of Ulster and Home Rule was to emerge. As said previously, the general election of December 19, Sinn Féin were to emerge the victors at the expense of the more moderate Irish Parliamentary Party. Sinn Féin took the majority of the 105 seats, with Unionists taking 26 seats in Ulster. They also took a seat in Trinity College, Dublin. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 was signed in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, France, by France and Germany. To date, the UK government have been busily focusing on the war effort and the negotiation of the treaty following the armistice on the 11th of November 1918, but the treaty formally ended the war. This is important because the efforts of basically British diplomats and the Prime Minister at the time were in negotiating this settlement, but knew immediately after that they would have to turn their attention to Ireland. A committee was established under the chairmanship of Walter Long, who was the former leader of the Ulster Unionists in Parliament, and was himself a Southern Unionist. This came to form the Fourth Home Rule Bill, or ultimately the Government of Ireland Act 1920. A set of radical proposals were established, proposing the establishment of two Home Rule Parliaments, one for the 6 counties of Northern Ireland and another for the remaining 26. At the second reading of the bill in March 1920, many Irish MPs opposed it. The bill was approved on the third reading on the 11th of November 1920 and received royal assent on the 23rd of December 1920 and came into force on the 3rd of May 1921. The elections to the new Northern Ireland Parliament were held on the 24th of May 1921, which was, in fact, also Empire Day. The Northern Ireland Parliament was opened on the 22nd of June 1921 by King George V, who was accompanied by Queen Mary, and it happened at Belfast City Hall. The reason it happened at Belfast City Hall in the council chamber there was that there was obviously no Stormont Parliament buildings then. That wasn't completed until 1932. And the Parliament had actually been meeting in Union Theological College just behind Queen's on Botanic Avenue. The Parliament of Northern Ireland was bicameral, consisting of a House of Commons with 52 seats and indirectly elected Senate with 26 seats, two seats of which were set aside for both the Lord Mayor of Belfast and the Lord Mayor of Londonderry. The first Prime Minister was James Craig, who was Carson's second lieutenant. Carson was offered the position but refused. He was deeply unhappy with the arrangements and later lambasted the London government for their handling of the situation in his maiden speech to the House of Lords in a debate on the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, which ended the war in Southern Ireland. He said, "I was in earnest. What a fool I was. I was only a puppet, and so was Ulster, and so was Ireland, in the political game that was to get the Conservative Party into power. I could not help thinking that it was very like, after having shot a man in the back, going over to him and patting him on the shoulder and saying, 'Old man, die as quickly as you can, and do not make any noise.' Why all this attack made on Ulster? What has Ulster done? I tell you, she has stuck too well to you, and you believe because she is loyal you can kick her as you like." Strong words for the former leader of Unionism. In part 2, I will be looking at the issues that faced the new Northern Ireland government. This included the security and formation of the Ulster Special Constabulary, given deterioration and civil unrest and attacks by the IRA in the new Northern Ireland. The finances, namely the cost of security, were paramount, and the bill ran into millions upon millions of pounds. And the fight as well, in light of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which established a boundary commission to retain the border of Northern Ireland, with nationalists using the idea of the boundary commission to think that they could make Northern Ireland so small that it would be unworkable. I would like to thank you for listening this evening, and if you have any questions, please feel free to post them under this post, and I will do my best to come back to you and answer your questions. Until next time, when we look at securing Northern Ireland, I look forward to speaking to you then. Thank you.